Writing a research paper. Note-taking. There are 3 steps to a writing process. Doesn't matter when or where you write, there are always 3 steps. Invention, drafting, and writing. You are in the invention stage of your research paper yet. You have put together your annotated bibliography, and you are ready to begin your note-taking. Your note-taking assumes that you've already collected your sources, you've read your sources, and you've annotated your sources, meaning you've underlined ideas that stand out and jotted your ideas in the margins. Now it's time to get yourself organized, to collect all of those ideas from your 14 sources and get them put into a system that will allow you to reference those notes, those direct quotes, those paraphrases while you are writing your research paper. Your research paper requires that you use at least 7 sources. A rule of thumb with research writing is that you include at least 3 citations per page. So on each page of your paper, at least 3 direct quotes or paraphrases. Also, another rule of thumb is that you introduce a new source on every single page. You don't want to run into a situation where you're relying too heavily on only one source. That makes it sound like there's only one source that agrees with you, only one scholar that is supporting what you're trying to say. So you want to avoid returning to the same source over and over and over and over in your paper. I think of it as like a 3 and out. I can cite one source 3 times in a row, and then before I go to it a 4th time, I need to have a different source injected into my writing so that I am not relying too heavily on only one source. So rule of thumb, 3 citations per page, 1 new source introduced per page. And that's going to allow you to follow that rule of like 3 and out. I can cite a source 3 times, and then I need to go out away from that source and cite something else before I go back to it. Today, let's focus on creating your note cards. You've read your sources, you've got your sources all around you. So let's say this is one of my sources, and I've got another source here, I've got sources all around me. I've already read them, and now I need to get my ideas out of the sources and onto something that's going to be manageable for me to work with when I'm writing my paper. The most basic process all of your scholars are going to tell you is to use note cards. And what you do is you take the source. So let's say I'm going to write about deadly trade. I'm focusing on poaching and how we can end poaching. So I've got my article here, I've read it, and I've underlined ideas in my article that I want to include in my paper, and so I go back and I page through my article and I find some of the ideas that I've underlined. When I find one of the ideas, oh yeah, that's a good one, I want to use that in my paper, I'm going to put that one idea on a note card. I'm going to use a different note card for each idea. I start my note card by writing down the title and the author of my article because I need to keep track which source this idea on this note card is from. If I don't keep track of that, I'm up a creek when I'm writing my paper because I won't know which source it's from. So this is from the National Geographic, it's from Deadly Trade, and the author of this article is Christie. So I'm just going to write Christie on the top of my note card, and that's enough to let myself know that this is from the article by Christie. If I wanted to be more specific, I could write down it's the National Geographic article so that I'm really clear that this is where it's from. Now I'm going to jot down my direct quote. I'm going to copy it exactly, word for word, capital letter, punctuation. I'm going to write down the direct quote. This is my note, right? This is the information I think I might end up using in my paper, so I'm writing it down word for word. I'm going to put quotation marks around it so that I know I copy this word for word. If I end up using this in my paper, I have to put quotation marks around it. And then at the end, I'm going to write my page number at the end so that I remember which page this is from. 1 note on each note card. So I have 1 note card done. I've got 1 direct quote that I think I'm going to use in my paper. I'm going to set it aside, pick up a 2nd note card, and I'm going to go find the 2nd thing that I underlined in this article. Again, I'm going to write Christie on the top because that's the author. I'm going to write down the National Geographic so I remember which source this quote is from. I go with my quotation mark and I'm going to copy word for word what I underlined on this page that I think I might end up using in my paper. Include the page number at the end so that I'm organized. I know which page, which source this note came from. 2 note cards done. pick up a third one. Go find my third thing I underlined in this article and create my note card for that idea. Once I have written down all of my notes from this article, I put it aside. I pick up my other article, and I do the same thing again. I write down the author, where this is from, any note that I need to keep track of which source this note is from. I jot down the direct quote, and I note the page number. I need to stay organized. If I omit the author, if I don't include a page number on my note card, I'm going to regret it later, because I'm going to have to go back and figure out, shoot, which source was this from, and on which page was it written. I'm supposed to tell you to do all of this in paraphrase. Paraphrase everything. I hate paraphrasing. I might not end up using this note card in my paper. I might decide that, oh, I thought this note was going to fit, but you know what? It doesn't really fit, and I'm not going to use it. And so I don't want to waste my efforts paraphrasing something I don't end up use. So I directly quote everything on my note cards. And then when I'm writing my paper, I switch it into paraphrase. But on my note cards, all of my notes are direct quotes. And I'm very clear that it's direct quotes by putting my quotation marks so that I know these are not my words. I cannot put these words into my paper without the quotation marks and the citation. If you want to do your note cards in paraphrase, you certainly can. Once you have all of your note cards done and together, so let's say I've got all 21 of my note cards here, all done and ready to go. Now I'm going to organize my note cards. I'm going to organize them based on topic. To do that, I have to write my paradigm. Here's my outline. My outline has the introduction, my claim right at the top. Here's what I'm going to be arguing. And then in my body, I think about my body the same way I think about an argument paper. I have the exposition, which gives background information about my subject. You know, what does my reader need to know in order to enter into a conversation about this topic? After the exposition part of my outline, then I go into my counter arguments. Here are the major counter arguments I'm going to develop. From there, I list the arguments. These are the major arguments I will develop in my paper. I like to write my conclusion too on my outline, just so that I know where I'm going. Not all writers do this. You don't have to write your conclusion on your outline. I just like to. Make sure, though, that you know what your claim is. Write your claim on your outline. Make sure you know which ideas, main ideas, must you include in your exposition. Do you have counter arguments you need to address? If you do, list them out. What are your arguments? Once you have your paradigm done, and you have your notes on your note card, now it's time to organize things. So I look at my first note. And let's say this first note happens to relate to the second idea of my exposition on my paradigm. I'm going to write that on here. I'm going to write exposition 2 so that I know this note card, I'm going to use this note card when I write the paragraph that goes along with the second idea on my exposition. Let's say this note card has to do with a counter argument. Maybe my first counter argument, that's where I'm going to use this note card. So I'm going to write down on this note card counter argument 1 so that I know when I get to that section, this is the note card that I need to have in front of me. I need to have this note, so I'm sure I get that into my section for counter arguments 1. I'm going to do this with all 21 of my note cards. Figure out which part of my paper they match to. Sometimes I'm not sure. Sometimes I feel like, oh, maybe it could be an argument. Maybe I'll use this in the counter argument. I'm not sure. And so I'll write that on there. Not sure. And I might even have a miscellaneous pile of note cards if I'm not sure where it's going to go. This is how you keep yourself organized, you guys. It might feel like this is a lot of work and I can skip it. I don't have to do that. It's really difficult to organize an 8 to 10 page paper that uses 7 different sources and adds a new idea to the field of study that you're writing about. It's difficult to do that without some crutches, without some tools to help you out. Your note cards are an invaluable tool to help you out. Please don't skip this step. Some of you will choose to use note cards. You'll write it all out on your note card. My handwriting is lousy. I don't like writing. I make digital note cards. So my digital note cards look just like a note card that I might create on a note card, but I do it on my computer screen. So here's the last paper that I wrote. This is my digital note card. So I have the source listed here. My first one is an internet source. here's my source, and then right underneath the source, if it's an internet source, you copy and paste, you don't have to write it all out. Underneath this is where my book sources start. So I read a book where Reef was the author. And so all of these are the direct quotes that I took out of that source written by Reef. I have quotation marks around it because it's a direct quote. I need to know it's a direct quote. And I have the page number at the end. Title page, that's the page that this direct quote was on, so that I'm still organized. I still know which source this information came from and which page number, because I need that information in my paper. My next source that I used was the British Library, Writers' Lives, written by LaFay. So all of my information from LaFay I've typed onto this document, one note at a time. So this note was on page 93. This direct quote I got on page 90. This one was also on page 90. But I have them all separated, just one chunk at a time. Once I do all of this with all of my sources, then I take a scissors and I cut them apart. If you have children, this is a perfect job for your children. Hand them a scissors and tell them to get busy. Cut them all. If you have a little sibling, there you go. Cut them apart so that you end up with all these little slips of paper. Once I cut them apart, well, now I have note cards. They're not quite as pretty. They don't stack up quite as well, but now I have note cards. And I do the same thing that I did with my other note cards. I match up. So which part of my paper will I use this quote in? I think this one will be exposition. Maybe the second the second paragraph in my exposition. So I label this one, exposition 2. Maybe this one is going to be one of my main arguments, main argument 3. So I label them all so I know which part of my outline this direct quote is going to go along with. Then when it comes time to writing that section, I take my stack of note cards that all relate. Let's say I'm writing the section of my paper for main argument 2. What's my main argument 2? Where's my paradigm? Got a mess here. My second main argument is, it's about a character. Fanny is her name. Fanny is a window to other characters, and she's also a window to Jane Austen's life. That makes no sense to you, but that's my second argument. So when I'm ready to write my paragraph about that argument, I put in front of me all of my note cards that go along with that argument. I lay them out in front of me on my table, got my computer in front of me so I can write, and I have all of my notes sitting here, and I can work them in as I go. It's a way to keep you organized, and it's a way to make sure that your paper stays organized. Otherwise, you're going to have a headache and you're going to be crying when you're writing this thing, because it's hard if you don't have a method to stay organized. So, whether you choose to use paper and pencil note cards or to use digital note cards that you type and then end up cutting apart, choose one way or the other to compile all of your information. After you get your note cards done, write your outline, write your paradigm so you know what the major sections of your paper will be, and then decide which section of my paper do each of my individual note cards match up to. Label them, put them on separate piles, and then when you're ready to write that section, you grab that pile so you have your notes right in front of you. If you're on track, we will have our note cards finished by the end of the day on Tuesday, which means you've got some reading and studying to do. Use your time wisely, do your reading and studying, and then when you come to class on Tuesday, we're going to be answering questions about note cards, and we're going to be writing note cards on Tuesday. Good? All right, shoot me your questions if you have any, and I will be responding.